Hi, I'm Auxilium, and let's not beat around the bush. Today we're talking about Black Sapphire Cookie's new legendary costume, and why I believe it can only point towards one thing. Black Sapphire Cookie will kill Shadow Milk Cookie and become the real villain. And why I think that makes a lot of sense, actually. And no, I am not rage baiting you. I genuinely believe that Black Sapphire Cookie could, or maybe even should, kill Shadow Milk. If you happen to have watched my video, Shadow Milk is the true hero, you probably already know what I'm talking about, but don't worry, you don't have to watch the video to understand what I'm talking about today. Normally I do long-form essay style videos, but today I want to do a kind of free talk video and just think aloud, because I think it fits the subject matter better. So we're gonna start off with the costume analysis, and then we're gonna go into why Shadow Milk must die at the hands of Black Sapphire. If you want to skip to the costume part and go to the murder mystery, I'll put a stamp here so you can skip. Also, be warned, there will be very limited editing for this video, so if you're just listening, you're probably also fine. So let me get straight into it. Black Sapphire Cookie's new legendary costume sits at the razor's edge of several archetypal figures. And this is not a Jungian analysis or something like that. Although I really greatly value Jung, it is also not a kind of TV tropes, which archetype is this character, why this is bad somehow analysis video, but it's more about archetypes in the traditional or generic sense, you know, a type of character or character type repeating across stories throughout history and cultures. I'm also not saying that these are the perfect definitions of these archetypes, but they all kind of come up in this new outfit. And that's why I want to talk about them. The first one I want to talk about is the archetype of the Seer, or the archetype of the clairvoyant. The Seer is a figure who is able to access knowledge that they themselves likely don't even really understand. They are someone who can see into the future or the past, but they don't necessarily know what to do with this knowledge. They often end up being outcasts. Their gift is often unsettling to the social structures surrounding them, and they're often just punished for it, making them pariahs. And oftentimes they have these, random bursts where they see something or they say something, and then it all goes downhill from there. And where I see this archetype in Black Sapphire Cookie's new costume is first in his dark circles on his icing. He has just seen a lot, some of it extremely incomprehensible and frightening to him. And most importantly, or most important of all, I want to say, in the name, the Black Blight. I need us to really appreciate this name for a moment, because it, first of all, it's an amazing name for a costume, but also to really understand what that means. The Black Blight, that sounds almost like a rapturing event, like a disease, or just something you just don't want to encounter in the flesh. And this is where the name of the costume set really matters, because let's just taste the title, you know? Beings of ancient scriptures. That's so beautifully ominous almost. Black Sapphire Cookie is not just some kid from a village, cursed with clairvoyance, but his arrival was expected. Generations upon generations have worried or warned about his arrival, of the child with the gift of seeing, and once he arrives, he will bring great disaster. He is like the apocalypse itself, and you better pray on your hands and knees that you do not live to see the day that he actually shows up. Which actually brings us to the next archetype. I wanted to bring this one up later, but now that I think about it, it fits better here, is the archetype of the Prohpet. The word apocalypse literally means the lifting of the veil, and Black Sapphire Cookie is in fact donning a very beautiful kind of headscarf, which is connected to some kind of rope, and his hair, which has this very nice gradient from black to white, with these golden dots across his hair, and also reminds me of a bejeweled veil. As an archetypal prophet, he would be the announcer of a great disaster, of the Black Blight, and must I remind you, he's a host, and that would later become ancient scripture, you know? Compared to the Seer, the prophet is not marginalized, or at least not a pariah. In fact, people congregate around him. They follow his word. He is charismatic, he is charming, mysterious. He just has this air or aura of mystique surrounding him. And may I remind you, he won Cookie and Husband of the Year 2025. But it's just that the scope of what the prophet reveals is also usually much greater. It's usually eschatological, about what happens when we die as individuals, but also when we all die, you know? What happens after the apocalypse, after the great rapturing? You know, the balance of the cosmos itself. This, I think, could be why his hair is covered in these golden dots, because it would be representative of the night sky, stars, celestial bodies, just things that are so large and foreign, we can just never dare to comprehend or even attempt to. And the hair is actually where I think the other archetype comes in, which is the medium. You know, the one who connects the world of the living and the dead. In stories where they appear, mediums are usually cast aside. They are either pariahs, like the Seer, or they have to hide their gift. You know, they are living an otherwise normal life outwardly, but they're hiding their true powers to commune with the dead, to, you know, not be outcast. Now, compare the medium to the Seer. The Seer is part of a larger community, the abandoned child, the orphan, the vagabond. And the prophet, compared to that, deliberately shows up in a community because this is what he was meant to do. He was meant to show up there in that time. And then you have the medium, who is someone you have to yourself deliberately seek out. Their names, they're usually hushed, a secret, and consulting them is treated as a last resort effort in fiction. It's usually an old woman, but not always, and she's usually closer already to the world of the dead than the world of the living, even when she is young. Why do people seek her out? Maybe they want to make peace with someone from the afterlife, or they need guidance, or maybe they are cursed and hope they can learn more about it by talking to the other side. And mediums are also often associated with mirrors too. In the recent Ovenbreak update, where Dark Enchantress Cookie has this whole thing where she looks into the mirror and sees her kingdom self failing, she thanks the being in the mirror for guiding her. And somehow Black Sapphire Cookie's hair also reminds me a bit of the reflection in a mirror, or well, a stylized reflection like you would see in a painting. But this is a bit far off. Where I think definitely the connection is a bit clearer is the white hair itself and also the dark circles again. Black Sapphire just has he's not only seen so much that he's worn thin and gray and white in his hair. It's also, we've seen how Cookie Run draws, or how the visual language portrays cookies who are old in terms of age. And this costume does not make Black Sapphire Cookie look older. it just makes him look tired, almost withered, but not old. He looks like he's closer to death than he is to being alive. But this might actually be a good transition into these next two archetypes. The first one of which is the fortune teller, which I connect to these eye symbols across his clothes and jewelry, which are of course very closely related to the visual language of Shadow Milk. But fortune tellers are similar to mediums in that you approach them for something you want to gain from them. But the stakes are usually much smaller and less grand, like your love life or future promotion, your health, things like those. These questions you know of everyday life. Many times she ends up being heroic or a divine figure, someone who actually has divine insight. But just as many times probably she becomes a villainess, closer to a witch than a figure of salvation. It's more like she happens to be there. This is actually a very fitting archetype for Black Sapphire Cookie because the fortune teller's fortunes work like gossip. Even when what they predict ends up being true or ends up being correct, it's treated more of like a coincidence, still something you have to be wary of, but also something that is very easy to instrumentalize. At this point, you probably noticed that all these archetypes I've laid out so far are predominantly associated with female characters or women characters in fiction. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think there's definitely, across all of Cookie Run, there's this play, the whole topic of gender and masquerading. And of course, we could go and connect that back to Jung with the anima and animus, but I don't think it's really necessary. And the last archetype I want to talk about connects again to the robe and the veil and these eyes and stars, but also finally, probably for some of you, to the microphone or the staff. And that's the archetype of the shaman, and also partially the archetype of the druid. Shamanism, as a general category, is the oldest spiritual practice that we know of. And it's up to several 10,000 years old, actually. And it usually centers around one person, the shaman, who enters these altered states of consciousness, to connect to the spirit world. He learns about remedies, spells, the future, the afterlife. He also serves as an anchor for the human and non-human world, or maybe also a bridge between the two and the great beyond, the things we can't see. This is also where I want to again bring up Black Sapphire Cookie's staff or microphone. Has a lot of personality, and we all know by now that in Cookie Run, if a cookie has a staff, they are usually quite powerful. Not always, but very often. Especially if that staff is sentient. Think of Pure Vanilla Cookie's staff, which also has a lot of personality. Ultimately, I'm thinking of the shaman more in terms of a general category that encompasses the others, which are more specialized versions. But this is not anthropological categorization that I'm producing here. This is more ad hoc than a really grounded observation. So please don't put too much weight into these free, unsorted, unfiltered thoughts. Please don't cite me in your papers. Neither do I deserve it, nor do I want you to get a bad grade. Anyway, you're probably wondering why any of this is relevant at all, and you're actually right to wonder. If you happen to have watched my video on Shadow Milk is the true hero, you probably noticed that that video is not actually about Shadow Milk Cookie at all, and is instead about Black Sapphire Cookie and one mystery cookie. I'm not gonna spoil here. But in that video, I basically outline how and why Black Sapphire Cookie is likely, or it would make sense for him to end up betraying his master, to end up betraying Shadow Milk and killing him. Yeah. Now, before you click off, let me start off by saying betrayal is pretty common in Cookie Run, especially Kingdom. There's avocado cookie, there's smoked cheese cookie, pastry cookie, pomegranate cookie with her village. Even dark enchantress cookie is basically a form of betrayal. All the beast cookies also technically betray their purpose, and I guess the witches, at least the cookie eating ones too, I guess. It's just that this is a pattern that repeats all over the story, again and again. And you just have to wonder, will any of these usurpers or betrayers ever achieve their goal? And yes, or maybe no, but there is one cookie who came very, very close, or at least that's how I remember it. And that was Snakefruit Cookie in Oven Break, who almost succeeded in becoming a dragon. Almost. They don't in the end. And maybe it was not even as close as I remember it right now. I play Oven Break every day, and way more often than Kingdom, but I never really got into the dragon lore. But again, it did not happen. There was an attempt at betrayal, there was an attempt at usurping, but it didn't happen in the end. So the question remains, will we ever see a usurper succeed? And in the True Hero video, I just kind of throw it out there, but I argue that yes, a Black Sapphire Cookie who has proven to be a very obedient and diligent follower of his master Shadow Milk Cookie will end up being the one to succeed in usurping his master. That's because of one thing. Shadow Milk Cookie corrupted because he concerned himself with truth and deceit, and lying as a social technology that produces chaos, but also social cohesion. Not coherence, cohesion. Black Sapphire is really, if you think about it, Shadow Milk's master student, and the archetypal struggle of student and teacher. This struggle demands that the student must become the teacher, or like the Chinese proverb says, the blue from the indigo is bluer than the indigo, or must become bluer than the indigo. That's because teachers as archetypal figures are not in some harmonic or even necessarily benevolent relationship with their students. It's very easy to think of them as kind of father figures and their student as a son, or mother and daughter, whatever you want. But there is actually quite a lot of struggle and tension going on. And that's the struggle between student and teacher, or student and master. If the student wants to fulfill his destiny and to prove that he really was a student, he has to see the holes in the master's teachings. He must understand where it breaks and where it is incomplete. And when that happens, when he finally realizes what the teacher doesn't know, he overcomes the teacher. And if you think about it, this is actually kind of, I want to call it the ultimate act of pedagogy in overcoming your teacher so that you yourself can become a teacher. And this is not just about social roles or institutions. This is also metaphysical. The student who overcomes his master commits a kind of symbolic patricide. That means he symbolically kills the father or father figure. And the master's role is only fulfilled when that actually happens. I'm sure you can come up with a million examples where this happens, where the master ends up being defeated. or outsmarted by his student because of something the master was simply oblivious to or thought was unimportant. And then once it happens, the student defeats his master. He's overcome his teacher, overcome his master, and the cycle can continue. He can now become a teacher himself. Mind you, this applies to a very specific kind of pedagogy, not the kind of mass literacy, mass schooling, mass university that we have nowadays in the great 2026. And also, please don't take this literally. Please don't. This is completely symbolic. But I think this analogy is very fitting. Not just because, well, Black Sapphire is quite obviously Shadowmilk's master student, but also because Black Sapphire Cookie actually already kind of has overcome Shadowmilk, at least internally, and for that we can think of Pure Vanilla Cookie, when he, falls and becomes the truthless recluse, which he overcomes and then becomes compassionate Pure Vanilla Cookie. Compare this to Shadowmilk Cookie, who fell from grace as fount of knowledge and corrupted. So we have two directions. You either ascend and become compassionate, which requires a certain degree of willful ignorance, or you become self-obsessed, you become deluded, because your mind cannot escape the labyrinth of despair that is realizing that, yes, the world is built upon lies. The world requires lies to function. And this might sound crass, but Shadowmilk Cookie is right when he says this, that the world is built upon lies. We need them for our world to continue functioning. Lies are just as much part of what we know as the things that are true. But Black Sapphire Cookie, he sees this with Shadowmilk, then he sees it with Pure Vanilla and the Truthless Recluse. He is the one who is given a one-in-a-lifetime chance to see this and realize, there is another way. And that is abandoning truth altogether. And I think this is already why he is the cookie of gossip. And that is why he is in a very specific position within the context of the story that he can overcome Pure Vanilla Cookie and Shadowmilk Cookie. Because gossip doesn't care about being true. It only cares about circulation. Let me elaborate. For gossip or a rumor, it doesn't matter if it is correct. Like accusing someone of adultery or spreading a rumor about someone cheating. It doesn't matter if they actually did it. Just as much if the gossip is completely wrong, like we see in the game when he spreads the rumor about latte cookies certifications being forged. As long as the rumor or the gossip is out there, it functions in the world, it does something. Even if you yourself do not believe the rumor, others might. And also, even if you don't believe it, your behavior will still restructure itself around the rumor. If you bring it up, you're continuing and spreading the gossip and doing more social harm. But you can also ignore it. But even if you do that, you're still interacting with it in a meaningful way through abstinence. You have to make the deliberate choice to ignore it. This is why Black Sapphire Cookie is kind of like a pathogen. Even if the rumor is, quenched, the social field has shifted just enough that it has been invaded, meaning has been created where there was none before that. Because meaning, just like truth and deceit, is not something that just exists out there in the world on its own, like something you can find in the forest or something, but it's socially created, Truth, deceit, lies, meaning, they're created through shared stories. And yes, sometimes lies too. Sometimes meaning requires both truth and lies. But because Black Sapphire Cookie only cares about social power with his gossip, this is ultimately what gossip is used for, he is not as susceptible to the kind of corruption that Shadow Milk Cookie fell victim to. Because Shadow Milk really is a scorned idealist. He wants the world to be concerned with truth. That's what he wanted cookies to do when he was the fount of knowledge. And even as Shadow Milk Cookie, he wants cookies to fall for his lies. But because to him, these lies are only meaningful if they are believed. Same with Pure Vanilla Cookie as the truthless recluse. He only thinks it's meaningful if the truthless recluse actually believes in this uselessness of truth. And gossip doesn't care about any of that. That's the big difference. It functions as long as it circulates. It's about social physics and not about truth value. You cannot calculate yourself out of a social problem through truth tables, because something can still be a lie and meaningful, but something can also be true and irrelevant, and gossip just spreads. And this is why I think Black Sapphire Cookie in some way has already overcome Shadow Milk. Now, you cannot defeat Black Sapphire Cookie by going, your rumor is wrong, this is incorrect, because what happens after a false rumor is exposed? You can just as easily spread a true one. That's what gossip is about. You can also air out dirty secrets or hidden things you wish would never see the light of day. Again, truth value is just completely irrelevant. It's only about how words can be instrumentalized. And because of this, I believe that Black Sapphire Cookie, I want to say must end up killing Shadow Milk Cookie, but this is also not completely true. But I think it would make a lot of sense if Black Sapphire Cookie ended up killing Shadow Milk Cookie. How could that look like? Either Shadow Milk Cookie is rehabilitated by Pure Vanilla Cookie and becomes docile. The world is restored and in harmony. In that case, Shadow Milk Cookie, as Black Sapphire's master, is functionally already dead as a master. And Black Sapphire simply closes the book on a finished chapter. You know, he just continues what Shadow Milk failed to achieve. Or, there's another way this could work. That is, Shadow Milk Cookie attempts to launch his final attack as a last resort, and Black Sapphire Cookie, seeing that his master is at his highest, you know, he's going all in, realizes and just assumes, I want to say, is his destiny, and just kills Shadow Milk. Meaning he would continue where Shadow Milk, quote-unquote, left off. This would be a kind of iconoclasm, as he would be destroying the symbol of oppression and then himself becoming the oppressor. That would really be the moment that he becomes like the true Black Blight. Just imagine this for a moment. Shadow Milk at his highest, as his most violent, overcome by his student who ends up being even more insidious. Maybe you have different preferences for storytelling and the like, but I think this is a very elegant way to deal with this story, because both of these outlines are possible. Possible and not realistic. I know these are two different aspects, but why do I think they are possible and actually quite plausible? Because they resolve the tension, and this is where I think they're quite elegant. They resolve the tension of Pure Vanilla Cookie versus Shadow Milk Cookie in a particularly meaningful way. What I'm gonna say sounds crazy, but if the central theme of the story, of this conflict, is truth versus lies, neither Shadow Milk nor Pure Vanilla Cookie are wrong. We need lies for the world to function, and so do we need truth. But we cannot pick one side. we cannot say that truth prevails without cheapening the gravitas of the conflict. But we also cannot let Shadow Milk win, because it would be extremely cynical and maddening and would be going against a lot of the themes and everything the story stood for so far. And also simply, this is a gacha game. It has to go on, it has to continue as long as it makes money. Imagine they kill off Shadow Milk and some new big bad must arrive. Where do you go from there? Truth versus lies is like... No, not just like... Truth versus lies is one of the core questions of philosophy. What can I know? How can I know what I know? You can only escalate from this conflict, if we're being honest, by adding another dimension to it that was previously ignored. Because Black Sapphire Cookie, he doesn't ask, what do I know? He asks, how can I use my words in my favor? How can I gain power? And this is also the conflict of the fount of knowledge. Look at it. Cookies come to him. They ask for knowledge. They ask for truths. But whether he lies or not, Cookies use these answers to sow chaos anyway. There's a section in Beasties 14 where Pure Vanilla Cookie, or is it 15? Anyway, where Pure Vanilla Cookie is forced to be the fount of knowledge in his mind. And it just points at this one simple fact, that the cookies start a war with a neighboring village anyway. Knowledge is never pure. Nothing can be as pure as Pure Vanilla Cookie, but knowledge is never pure. It is always and can always be used sociopolitically. And it is not about if knowledge is true or it's about facts or whatever. I'm not saying this in some sort of everything is political kind of slogan, or this is not the fount of knowledge debunked question mark, but about a simple fact. Everything you say, everything you believe, everything you see, you hear, everything you experience functions in the world. It changes something about how the world works, how the world is, from how it was before. And Black Sapphire Cookie, as the cookie of gossip, just realizes that if that's the case, he may as well use this to his advantage by instrumentalizing it, by using it to achieve something else. And this is where I'm gonna circle back and try to close this video, because this has already been way too long, I think, and argue that I think this is why Black Sapphire Cookie was given this costume as the Black Blight. If what I just outlined actually happens, if Shadow Milk is overcome by him, then he is truly an apocalyptic event. He really is the final veil that must be lifted for the structure to collapse. He could be a cruel, despotic emperor, completely unsalvageable, but charismatic nonetheless, as a villain that rules and oppresses with an iron fist. I believe his fans, or we as a Cookie Run fandom collective, would not really care. We would vote him as Cookie of the Year anyway. But this is where he also, again, connects back to these other archetypes, because like the fortune teller, for him it's not about whether what he says is true or not. It's about what his word functions to do. And it's also, connecting to the Seer in that he would bring great catastrophe. With the Shaman, he has groups congregating around him. I can easily see a plot line where Black Sapphire Cookie, even if none of what I just talked about happens, where he just kind of develops a cult-like following in the cookie world. Maybe the weakest tie is that of the medium, but again, all of these archetypal ties are in themselves quite vague. But what ultimately, where it ultimately ends, is that he cannot be defeated by truth or friendship powers. Or maybe he can. But again, he does not deal in truth. He does not deal in truth value, in whether something is correct or not, something is true or false. He would require a very different kind of story, a very different kind of hero to defeat him. And this is probably the point where I just have to admit that most likely everything I just said is completely wrong. Just straight up. Everything I said is completely wrong in the future. And, you know, actually, I will be honest. I would love it if that happened, you know? I would love it if I was proven wrong. Because I want to see what else this game has in store for us. But, right now, at least, I think this is a very important archetypal tension that the story is pointing towards. Or at least that's what I see in it. But, no, wait, actually. So, for now at least, I want to say this is a archetypal tension that's being pointed towards. But the current tension that's actually much more important is an ethical tension, which I want to explore in a future video. And that is whether Pure Vanilla Cookie is actually the true villain as of right now. And that is actually not rage bait, but a real ethical question, because it also connects to the compassion of his compassionate form, and to Silent Salt Cookie's solidarity, and to the question of whether White Lily Cookie can be forgiven. I still cannot believe they just dropped that in the Hot Ones challenge video, like wow. But it also connects to, you know, I've seen these memes of people saying Pure Vanilla Cookie is finally locking in now that he's fighting Shadow Milk Cookie. I don't think he is. I don't think he is. At least not right now. But as I said, I will explore that in a future video. I will probably wait for the next 1 or 2 updates to see what happens so I can, you know, judge the situation appropriately. But that's a completely different kind of video. Anyway, thank you so much for sharing your time with my ramblings today. And I really can't wait to see what Cookie Run has in store for us next. Because I really love Cookie Run. Even if some people might think I'm lying, or I'm not. I am not lying. I really love Cookie Run. And I am trying to. I'm not saying it is perfect. But I'm trying to listen. To just really listen what the cookies can't say and only whisper. And that's why I hope we will see a lot more of the cookie world in the future. And their magical, whimsical, and sometimes very philosophical adventures. Again, thank you so much for sharing your time with my thoughts. And maybe we'll come across each other in the comment section under a cookie video, or in another video, which, just like this one, and all my other videos before this, will be baked with love for Cookie Run.